I am thrilled to introduce two popular, powerful women who were engaged in one of the most compelling fights, civil rights fights this summer, which involved the fight for the Supreme Court. First, we're going to hear from Dahlia Lithwick, who we all know and read. Her brilliance, her wit can make simple, very complex legal issues, but really touched many of us when she talked about her own Me Too experience with Judge Alex Kaczynski, and inspired other women to come forward and tell their own stories, leading to his resignation. And then we're also going to hear from Senator Mazie Hirono.
That's nice.
Mazie Hirono stands out in the Senate because she stands up for fellow immigrants, for fellow women, for fellow people of color, and she speaks for all of us who are fed up with what this president is trying to do to our courts. So we are thrilled to have her here today, and knowing that these two women are known for their spicy language, I think we're going to have a really active, lively conversation. So please welcome to the stage Senator Hirono and Dahlia Lithwick.
Go ahead, you
Go first.
Oh, you want me to go?
Because you sit in the chair ahead of me. Okay. Hi. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
So I think
Aloha.
you're in the far chair.
Aloha, everybody.
And thank you to Christine for that lovely introduction. We're both pledging not to use spicy language.
Unless we're moved to do so. You never know.
Unless forced to. Senator, this is such a thrill. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dahlia.
I guess, you know, in one sense, this is a little bit of the grumpy panel. Because all morning we've been hearing about organizers and the elections and the blue wave and all the amazing stuff, and we're here to talk about the courts, and that's not necessarily the feel-good story of 2018, and we're poised to have likely even less success, although we had a big pushing back the FAR nomination was not inconsequential. But I guess I just wanted to lead with this question. This just feels like a juggernaut. Donald Trump has already seated a sixth of the federal judiciary, overwhelmingly 80% white, 80% male, some staggering 30% rated not qualified by the American Bar Association, and a few times, a few are batted away, usually if they disgrace themselves. But is this just one of those things where we're just going to have to swallow it for the next 2 years?
This is a perfect example, to me, of elections mattering. It makes a difference. And so as long as we don't have the majority in the Senate, I'm afraid that what we can do is to speak out and to point out how terrible all of these nominees are in terms of civil rights, women's rights, voting rights, all of the kinds of issues that we all care about, immigrant rights. And what we can do is to speak out, and one hopes that people voting will be able to connect the dots and realize that the people who are sitting in the Senate, that they're electing to the Senate, will be making decisions on confirming all of these terrible judges. And you forgot to mention that a huge percentage of them are all members of the Federalist Society, because you have these two organizations, the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation, who have spent decades and millions of dollars really just having all these people join when they're even in law school or young lawyers, and they are all prepared to become the kind of judges that will be people they can support. So we don't have anything institutionally that comes close, but we have our voices, so we have to start with that, I would say.
So I guess that leads to this question that is a much larger question than elections matter, which is, why the asymmetry, Senator? Why are Republicans so good at saying, we'll put up somebody who, could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, but it's okay because the courts matter, and people vote for him? I mean, the exit polls suggested, but by about a 2-to-1 margin, people held their nose and voted because the courts matter. Why are Democrats in that 2016 election, Democrats were not running on, there's a vacant seat called Merrick Garland, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 83, and Anthony Kennedy is 80, and Steve Breyer. We didn't peep about that.
And I think that we were very much responsible for not talking about those things, because it's so clear after Trump got elected. I don't think any of us thought that the man was going to get elected, for one thing. When that happened, and to realize that he was going to start court packing from day one, and of course aided and abetted by Mitch McConnell, who so arrogantly said that Merrick Garland, forget it, he's not even going to get to meet with any of us or have a hearing. It was just so astoundingly abnormal that it took us a while to, at least it took me a while to, come to the conclusion that court packing is something that I want to have everybody in our country understand is going to impact their lives in terms of all of the issues. You know, in January, I have people from Hawaii coming to see me to protect this, that, and every other kind of federal program, and I tell them, you know that all of these programs could be challenged in court, and you have the court packing, and if we don't connect those dots, we're just going to get continually screwed. So I think it's really important for us to, us meaning the Democrats particularly, we have a responsibility, in my view, to explain to everybody how important all this is. And I tell you, using the word screwed, I've actually said that on national TV, so what the heck.
Yeah, we're going to have to get to the. You use language on national TV that my kids would go to their room for.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You should just chill then.
I know, I'm a horrible mother. If my children lay hands on this video, I am doomed for eternity. So before we let this go, I guess connected to this asymmetry of focus and intensity around the court, and obviously we're talking to a room of people who really, really care about the courts, what is the thing that Democrats need to be saying about why the courts matter? Like if it didn't work when we had a vacant seat that was held open for a year, and by the way, while Ted Cruz was campaigning on, right, Ted Cruz was running in 2016 saying not just, I held this seat open for a year, but I'll hold it open for 4 more years if Hillary gets elected. I mean, they're openly crusading about it. What is the thing Democrats need to say to help voters bump this from issue number 14 up to issue number 1?
I wish I had the answer to that, because one of the things that we Democrats have a really hard time is connecting to people's hearts instead of here. We're really good at shoving out all the information that touch people here but not here. And I have been saying at all of our Senate Democratic retreats that we need to speak to the heart, not in a manipulative way, not in a way that brings forth everybody's fears and resentments, but truly to speak to the heart so that people know that we're actually on their side. We have a really hard time doing that, and one of the reasons that it was told to me at one of our retreats was that we Democrats know so much. That is true, and we have to kind of tell everybody how smart we are, and so we have a tendency to be very left-brain, and we think that everybody makes their decisions on analysis. Really, that is not how people make decisions. So one of the books that I always bring up is The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, where the image is of an elephant, and the elephant is making all the decisions, go right, go forward, whatever. There's a rider on the elephant. The rider simply explains the elephant's decisions. Republicans speak to the elephant, the Democrats speak to the rider. That is why we're not speaking to people here, and we're just mainly going here, and it's a huge issue. So I tell people in my own way that I try to connect the dots with whatever program they're trying to support, whether it's immigrant rights, et cetera. I mean, most of the people who are immigration advocates already know very well that judges matter and the Senate matters. But there are a lot of programs that, social programs, et cetera, where they don't realize that these programs can all be set aside by the courts. Look at Lilly Ledbetter. Who knew that the court was going to throw out, decades of a certain kind of approach to employment discrimination? So I tell you, the Republicans are really good at being very focused on what they need to do, and we have a lot of issues and we're not as focused. But one of my areas of focus really is the court packing, because what does it matter who gets elected if you have, well, it does matter, but it really diminishes all of that if you just have people in the judiciary, you have judges who are just going to throw out the laws that have been enacted. So I see the challenges and I speak about it as much as possible. And most recently, 3 of us did an op-ed that appeared in Slate. It was me and Sheldon Whitehouse and Dick Blumenthal, and we wrote about the Roberts Court and what's going to happen to the Roberts Court with basically a very ideologically oriented court added by, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh.
So that leads to, you've just pretty much teed up my next question, which is like, Democrats love process and we love norms, and there's nothing that gets us more excited than talking about reinstating the filibuster and the blue slip as soon as we get control of the Senate.
I don't know about reinstating the filibuster, because I say we should maybe reinstate the filibuster after we get all our judges, as many of our judges on there. I feel like that's being really naive in many ways. So it's really sad that the blue slip process out the window pretty much, and just packing the panels with all these terrible judges. We only have 5 minutes to question a panel of 5 really bad nominees, and then having more than one circuit court nominee on one panel. So that's out the window, and not paying attention to ABA ratings, and having hearings when we're not even in session. So I have to say that the Republicans are very, very focused on court packing, and they can undo so many of the good things that have already been done. Look what's happened already with the Voting Rights Act, with Lilly Ledbetter, with Citizens United, Janus, against public sector unions, and EPIC systems. That's a huge. I happened to be at a dinner sitting next to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the first thing I said to her was, Justice Ginsburg, you have to live forever. That was the first thing. And then I spoke about EPIC system, and she said, that was a horrible thing, and I forgot that she had written the major dissent on it. But that's yet another case which just totally undoes, furthers the attack on unions.
So you mentioned Justice Ginsburg, and I'm currently obsessed with the idea that Justice Ginsburg is angry. And the word they keep using is badass, which is the word that is now, look, I said a bad word. And it's a word that is now being affixed to you. There is this meme out there that is Senator Hirono has gone badass, and that you're swearing, and that you're calling the president a liar, and you're confronting these sexual predators for being sexual. When does it stop, I ask you?
It doesn't until the cultural changes occur that stops this kind of behavior. We have a ways to go, apparently.
But I think the reason I'm so struck by it, and I want to talk about the Me Too questions in a second, but I think you're actually not angry. I think you're just being you and speaking words, and it's getting mapped onto this rage disorder thing that the internet wants to put on you. But this isn't anger, right?
No, it isn't. I've been this way for quite a while now, and it's just that I have many more opportunities to be vocal and visible, which if Trump hadn't gotten elected, believe me, I would hardly be calling the president a liar, misogynist, and
xenophobic,
calling for xenophobic and admitted sexual predator. So I said that all in basically 2 sentences and one encounter with the press. So I think it's really important for more of us to speak out. And believe me, any of you familiar with the Hawaii culture, I come from a culture that is not particularly confrontational. I'm of a race that is not particularly verbal. But I think it's very important for me. I mean, I didn't start out this way, by the way. It's a process. Becoming. And I feel like at this stage, I think it is important for more women to speak out, but it's not as I swear every other day or every other moment. And I tell you, with everything that's going on in this country, if you're not moved to swearing once in a while, you are not paying attention.
It's funny that the Canadian and the Hawaiian are talking about anger. My culture is also not one of fury.
There you go. We're very determined.
Yes, well, see, Canadians are just largely cold all the time. But I do want to talk about Judge Kaczynski because you started, in fact, I interviewed you last January, almost a year ago. You took it upon yourself. You said, I'm just going to ask every nominee, not even just the judicial nominees, I'm going to ask them my 2 questions. Those 2 questions are, you can...
Well, whether as an adult they'd ever asked for sexual favors or engaged in any behavior that can be characterized as sexual harassment, and whether they have ever had to be disciplined or enter into any kind of a settlement based on this kind of behavior. So I asked those 2 questions of every nominee, male and female, and I bet I've already asked over 100 of them, and I know that everyone who comes before any of the 5 committees I sit on, if they are nominees, they will be asked these questions. They are prepared to respond to them, and I think it's really important. I mean, it's kind of fascinating, isn't it, from a cultural standpoint, that this kind of behavior that has been going on, and we women basically have had to put up with it since, sadly, since time immemorial, but all these nominees have never been asked these 2 simple questions on behavior that's been a scourge for so many years, and any kind of situation where there's a power thing going on mainly. So, 2 simple questions, and I did think about it, though, before I started asking them, because it had never been asked before, and I thought, should I do it? But I thought, you know what, the Me Too movement has every potential of being pushed under the rug, and I didn't want that to happen. I just didn't want everyone to forget about how important it is that we address the issue of sexual harassment and assault in our country, and as a senator, I could do my little part to keep that in the forefront. And believe me, if all these people, because every single one of them say they've never done any of this stuff.
Including Brett Kavanaugh.
Including Brett Kavanaugh, but of course he did it when he was not an adult.
Right.
See, that was like an escape. But if any of them had engaged in this kind of behavior and somebody comes forward, they're under oath. I think it makes a difference that they are under oath.
So I guess when you asked then Judge, now Justice Kavanaugh that question, you didn't have in your mind that all this was coming. You asked it because you'd asked everyone this question. But you were also very focused in his hearings on the fact that he clerked for Judge Kaczynski. What about that? Clearly you didn't want to let that go, nor did I. What about that was salient for you? What were you pressing on?
I think it was pretty unbelievable that that friendship that he has with Kaczynski, the fact that Kaczynski testified on his behalf when he was first up for the circuit judgeship, that it was pretty unbelievable, not just to me, but to everyone, that he had never heard word one, no inkling that Kaczynski was engaging in this kind of behavior. And from what I understand, he was pretty notorious for the kind of comments and the behavior. And for Kavanaugh to say he had never had any inkling of it was pretty darn amazing. But as we went on with the hearing, and clearly during the Dr. Ford and his testimony, he was either evasive or I would say, especially when he was asked questions about what the words in his yearbook mean, I think pretty much everybody, I actually got some people calling me saying, the guy is lying. This is males who called, saying he's lying. But my gosh, so this man is on the Supreme Court, it makes me weep.
Yeah, I just went a different place for a second. I was just thinking it's my job to cover the Supreme Court, and it makes me weep. So I think I want to go back to that room, that hearing room. Vanita and you and I were all in that tiny little room. I think if you watched it on TV, you didn't necessarily get a sense of, that was a small room, and Judge Kavanaugh was in fact shouting and slamming his binder and slamming his pen. And I guess I want to close the circle having said, you one time said, shut up, and the internet went crazy because of your anger problem. And here, this man was screaming
crying and accusing
crying.
People. Half of the people who were interviewing him for a job, that we were all part of a conspiracy. I thought it was really an unbelievable performance on his part. And then you had Dr. Ford, just the nicest person, coming forward with something that was so painful to her and her family, and there he was just going on. And so the double standard is alive and well in our country. And this is why when I say certain things, which I describe as speaking plainly, I get, I have my share of criticism and people who think that all I do is swear, which I don't. But, it's a double standard. They expect us to behave a certain way. And the thing is that more people come up to me now all over the place saying things such as, you just speak the way I'm thinking, that this is all bullshit. There, I said it, yay!
Drops mic, yep.
So I say to people, it is not as though my communications people write down, this is where you say bullshit. It just comes out, and where I said the men in our country who are the perpetrators, who are basically, more of them are doing this kind of behavior, I said the men in this country just shut up and step up and do the right thing for a change. And there are some people who took offense at that, but there are a lot of men who tell me that they didn't find that offensive at all. And in fact, now I'm getting some calls from men who say, I'm now shutting up and stepping up.
All right.
So there.
So I think this goes to this point about the sort of norms and conventions of the Senate. One of the things that Senator Lindsey Graham was shouting about was how this was so violative of the norm of being nice to each other, and he shouted that. But I think that one of the things that it seems to me you're trying to do is to say, look, all these norms of civility and comedy and the way we treat one another are lovely, but there are real people, as you keep saying, who are getting shellacked, every day, and that we have to there's something beyond being kind to each other in the Senate. And I'm just so curious about why that has, it's seen as so transgressive that you're trying to blow up Senate norms. You're not trying to blow up Senate norms. You're just saying this civility covers for real inequity and injustice, right?
Totally. For people to talk about how we should have civility, and yet they have no problems voting for a bill that would knock 25 million people off of our health care. They have no problems with children being separated at the border. They hardly ever speak out, and that's why I've said, they're just, basically, they're cowards. And so don't talk to me about civility when all these things are going on. And people, minorities, women, LGBTQ minorities are just being raked over the coals. And I have said to my staff, before all of this happened, by the way, that one of the reasons I am in office is because I know that there are people in our country who are getting screwed every single second, minute, hour of the day, and if by our efforts we can decrease that number, we'll be making a difference and we will be doing our jobs. And I believe this. I've been saying this to my staff for years. I say, every person who comes to my office, just know that they would like us to help them, and that's what we're there for. But to really understand that I just met with advocates from the immigration community, and they told me stories about how the family separation hurts them, and I've experienced that in my own life, of course, but all of this pain is going on and being pushed out and supported, by the way, by lack of speaking out against it, by people who are saying, oh, we should be more civil to each other.
Right.
Oh, just shut up. Really?
And you've made this point just about your own, I think folks know you recently had about a cancer diagnosis, and you made the same point that everybody in the Senate was sending you these heartfelt notes about get well at the same time they were voting to repeal Obamacare. And I wonder, do you see part of your job to say, like, there's this world that you live in, and then there's this world that everyone else lives in, like, come join us here in reality, because it's sending a letter saying get well soon doesn't get you there.
And I think it was heartfelt. I think it was genuine that when they wrote to me saying that, please, we're praying for you and all that. I believe that was really heartfelt. But then they're able to bifurcate their behavior in really strange ways that I can't explain. And so I think the inability to empathize is a huge part of what happens with too many Republicans. They can't put themselves into the other person's shoes. And I realize empathy can be taught, but obviously they haven't learned that lesson. So I think it's really important going forward that we, I think it was Rebecca Tracer, she wrote a book about women's anger, that we should remain angry but very determined. We should not forget what it felt like to watch Dr. Ford testifying and what it meant to so many of us. Dr. Ford was vacationing in Hawaii recently, and she asked to speak with me and see me, and she was just as decent and kind person as she appeared in her testimony. And she said she could not have lived with herself if she did not come forward, because she knew that he was probably going to get confirmed, but it just shows that there are some battles that are worth fighting, and that was one worth fighting. And there are going to be many more battles that we're going to need to fight, but we just have to keep doing it. And I want to thank all of you who are fighting those battles, because these are not normal times. It's not just me or any one of us. It's all of us. And I know that sounds sort of like, I don't know, rhetorical or whatever it is, but it is going to take all of us to fight those battles and to speak out. I do hear from a lot of women who say that they're motivated now to speak up for themselves and to speak out, because what they see is just the inequity that's happening in our country, and it's just sort of hit them in the face where they live. So I am hopeful.
Rebecca Tracer always says, people ask her, was Christine Blasey Ford and Me Too, is this a movement or a moment? And I think what you've just said is, that depends on us.
Yes, it better be a movement, not a moment.
So my last question, I think, is you have all these people in this room who do this work. What do we do to support what seems this kind of very difficult mission you have, which is focusing people on the courts at a time when, like, oh my God, everything is crazy. I mean, nobody covers these judiciary hearings anymore because they're all the same. They're stacked and they're crazy, and what are you gonna do? And they're getting through. How do we help you focus the mind on the problem you and I started this conversation with, which is Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 85. This court, the median justice is now John Roberts. This is the most conservative court we've had in 100 years. And the court packing, as you're describing it, what Trump is doing, particularly on the appeals courts, is only in one direction for the next 2 years. How do we help you get the message out that this is something that it's just not as sexy as Bob Mueller, but it's important and we need to think about it?
I think it's pretty important to people if they know that the Supreme Court will probably decide the Texas case that's going to undo the protections for people with pre-existing conditions, which is 1 out of 4 people. So when I tell them that and I say, you know what, the Supreme Court can make a decision that's going to justify doing away with these protections, and then what are you going to do with your health care? You either won't get it or you won't be able to afford it. So to connect those dots, and then there's also a growing discussion about court reform. And I'm very interested in what we can do to take out some of the high-stakes battles that go on with these lifetime appointments. And my hope is that when we start talking about how we can make some changes, particularly to the Supreme Court, that maybe we'll be making some kind of progress, but the discussions need to start. And I know that some of you are probably already involved in those kind of discussions, and they have to reach a more of a understanding by the larger community. So Sheldon Whitehouse and I were 2 people who really thought about what can we do to fight back against the climate change deniers and the anti-immigrant people, all of that. And part of it is to have our own sort of institutional ability to respond to all of the terrible things that the right wing pushes out all the time on all kinds of platforms and mediums. So that's something that individuals can do to take it upon yourself. Write a law review article or speak at a gathering or do something, because I think that it all makes a difference. It's all making a difference. So that's what I ask of you folks.
And it has something to do, I think, with, so many of the folks we heard from this morning are about making that which is invisible visible, and particularly making it visible to the Senate in Dr. Blasey Ford's case, or making it visible to the courts in a way that, by the time these abstractions get to them, you can say it's just the census case. But this isn't just the census case, right? These are real people suffering real harms. And it feels to me that maybe this moment, and certainly everything I've heard at this conference today, really is about saying, like, we're here, we're not going away, we're making that which doesn't seem to break through the surface in the Capitol sometimes. And it does feel like it has something to do with empathy. I mean, when you talk about, imagining someone else's life, that just seems like it's in short supply in Washington or in the quarters of Washington.
Well, it definitely is, and I call it an ability to just kind of bifurcate what you're doing. But what was I going to say?
I didn't really ask a question. I was just free-associating.
But while you were speaking, I was thinking about some things that we ought to be doing. I am very encouraged by the young people who marched for a sensible gun legislation. I'm very encouraged by all the thousands of DACA people who came forward, and I believe that through that experience, if they ever become United States citizens, because we will provide them that opportunity, they will start running for office and they will make a difference. And look at the U.S. House now with minority representation. So, and the scientists who marched.
Right.
I mean, who ever heard of scientists marching? Wow. So there's a dynamic going on with more people becoming engaged. Or the thing that occurred to me was that I heard from people who were traveling all over the world, in Brazil and different places, and they would show the Kavanaugh hearings.
Yeah.
So the impact of what was going on with those hearings and how our country would view Dr. Ford, and they all watched Kavanaugh crying and screaming and accusing. I think they all shook their heads as to what is going on in America. But that interest is there. And so I think that we have to stay engaged in whatever way that we can. And also because these are not normal times, to reach out to other groups that we normally may not be collaborating with and working with, and to be very supportive. And I think that's how you get I hope, a critical mass of people who will then go to the polls and choose the kind of people who are not going to screw us over.
There's that word again.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a good word.
Okay. Now I do have to ask you this question, because I think you are the only immigrant in the U.S. Senate, right? You were born in Japan, raised in Hawaii. How do you, when you hear the just ferocious, weird anti-immigrant sentiment of this moment, does that map onto something that you know and remember, or is that just, are you shocked that it's out there? Are you shocked it's this virulent, or do you hear this and say, like, yeah, I know this? I guess I'm just wondering, is this astonishing in your life experience, or does it feel familiar and depressing?
Well, it's pretty depressing, but I think that racism is never far below the surface in our country. And if you go back historically, I mean, we started with the American Indians, and then we had the Chinese Exclusion Act, we had the internment of Japanese Americans, you have the Muslim ban. So racism is never far below the surface in our country, and we have to be continuously alert to that popping up. And of course, the Supreme Court's decision that validated what many of us call the Muslim ban just gives, in my view, Trump more of a power to designate whatever it is he does as for national security. And I suppose the Supreme Court would not look behind that declaration. So. Yeah, I am an immigrant, and my immigrant experience is never far from my memory, because I was almost 8 years old. I have a lot of memories of what it was like growing up with a single parent, and what it was like for my family to be separated from my younger brother because we couldn't afford to bring him and my grandparents. So, I take all of that and I bring it to the fore, and it keeps me going. The other thing that keeps me going, and I would suggest it to all of you as we are blasted on a fairly regular basis by what this administration is doing in the Trump. You have to have at least one Trumpless day. And so I have a Trumpless Sunday where I don't watch the news or anything, and I do things that are soul restoring.
Trumpless
Oh,
Sunday.
Trumpless Sundays. Sometimes I need the entire weekend to be Trumpless. And we need that.
So somebody actually this morning on one of the panels said the problem is when you tune him out, he's still there doing really, really bad stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess it's Trumpless Sunday and then a really Trumpy Monday morning.
Oh, yeah,
like
well, I mean, I know that it's all waiting for me on Monday, but I think we all need to do the things that are much more creative and soul restoring, as I call it. Go to the museums, do art, or do whatever it is, read. It helps me a lot to know that I don't have to turn on MSNBC or CNN on Sundays. It's really nice. Try it.
Trumpless Sunday. Okay.
Yes.
It's good for your figure. So I guess this really is legit. My last question. I got the time wrong before because I'm addled. But I think that one of the things that a lot of folks have talked about today is hope. And in some sense, you're kind of in a not super hopey institution right now because the Senate is like not the hopiest place in America. You know, the House really is, I think, undergoing, and it must be thrilling to see what's happening, particularly with women and women of color in the House. But I'm just wondering if you could maybe just send us off with just thoughts about how you see us extracting ourselves from this. What gives you, in other words, on Trumpy Monday, when you wake up and you're just like, oh my God, we have to deal with DACA and sanctuary cities and, you know, vote suppression and gerrymandering and all of it. And also there's a panel of 42 judges that I have 6 seconds to question. What gives you hope?
What's the alternative? Really, I mean,
beer, I think.
I don't think any of us are made in a way that we just want to throw in the towel. I don't think that's why you're here. And so I just keep going, and I think that's what we have to do. That, you know, people are always asking me, because I'm still undergoing treatment, by the way, because, you know, I'm not exactly cancer-free, but they ask me, how's it going? And I say, I just keep plugging away. That's what we do. That's what we have to do. You just keep plugging away and find other people who are plugging away, because the thing that the other side wants most is for us to be so distressed and depressed, and we'll go away. And that's the last thing that we should even be thinking about. And so do whatever you need to do in order to get back that energy and find other people. And, you know, I'm not just saying that because it sounds good, but that's how I proceed. And I have a wonderful staff that keeps me going, and I have Trumpless Sundays, and I do those things that will enable me to keep going. And I think friendships matter, and trying to be kind, and, you know, all of those kinds of things that sometimes we forget in the battle, but knowing full well that we have to stay in the fight. And I think I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who once wrote that, you know, it's those of us who remain in the arena, and I am certainly paraphrasing, but who remain in the arena, and we are bloodied, but we stay in the arena, and that's where we ought to be, as opposed to, there are a lot of people on the outside who take pot shots at us and who criticize what we do, politicians and all of that. But, you know, I am reminded that if you're never bloodied, then you're not in the battle. And so that's why we have to keep staying in the arena.
And yet you said be kind, and you're in an institution that gets pretty shouty, and you get a little shouty sometimes. So how do you...
I speak plainly.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
Well, can I just tell you one short story? So there's always, I do a lot of my bills, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but
go ahead.
President Trump has signed more of my bills into law than just about any other Democratic senator. But I think it's because they don't put down who the sponsors of the bills are. But it's not easy to get standalone bills passed, but I have, until Amy Klobuchar caught up with me, I had the record of having more standalone bills enacted into law than any other member of either the House or the Senate.
Wow.
And I work in a very bipartisan way.
Yeah.
all these bills I had bipartisan sponsors because I tell my staff it is very important that we find a Republican that I can work with because we understand that these are issues that face their constituents. And so I've been able to do that. But I'll tell you one story about Jeff Sessions, which is maybe not that well known. But Jeff Sessions, before he was Attorney General, helped me pass my very first bill. And it had to do with high-on relief, and this was the huge hurricane, terrible disaster that befell the Philippines. And I had a bill that would encourage people to continue to send money and get a tax write-off. And I had to get that bill out of the Senate in a very time-constrained manner. And so when we when we go to the floor of the Senate and we yank a bill out of a committee, ask for UC consent, and all it takes is one senator to say, I object. So I'm down there and I'm pulling this bill out of the committee. And I see Jeff Sessions walking in. This is about 11 o'clock at night. And I see him going into the Republican cloakroom. And so I go in there and he said, first of all, he looked really surprised. And he said, I'm here to say I object to your UC request. And I said, I know, that's why I'm here to talk with you. And I asked him, why is your caucus so against this bill? I know he was not prepared to answer such a question, so he just said, we don't like these kinds of bills, and we like to be consistent. And I said, consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Let me tell you why this bill is so important. And then I think the thing that really affected him was I was talking with him and talking about how the Philippines are our allies, thousands of them died, and all of that. And I reached out and I touched his heart. And I said, I am speaking to this. And it just took him aback. And he said, well, you're very persuasive. I still have to go out and say I object, but maybe we can work something out. And then something happened on the floor of the Senate that I've never seen happen before. So he objected, but then he said, my friend from Hawaii, this is really important to her, and I hope that we can work something out. And within, I would say, half an hour, we had worked something out. That bill got through the Senate, and then I had to go talk to Eric Cantor, who was 6 years serving in the House. I had never talked to. He was the speaker at that time. And I called him, and so got him on board, and then the president had to also be alerted because we had to, But he helped me pass, Jeff Sessions helped me pass my very first standalone bill. But then I said to him, I'm sorry, I still can't support you for Attorney General. But nonetheless, I really feel like I can find something to work with just about anybody. That doesn't mean I excuse their silence or anything like that, but at the same time, there are things that we can get done in a bipartisan way, and that's one of the things that keeps me going, to know that the president, I hope, is about to sign yet another one of my standalone bills. Don't tell him.
We're out of time, Senator, but I want to just close by saying that one of the things that has really given me hope in this past year, and especially, I think you probably know, for some of the women who spoke out initially against Judge Kaczynski, how really scary and vulnerable and lonely that enterprise was, and truly, truly knowing that right out the chute, you were going to stand in the spotlight and be the voice of that in the Senate. That really changed everything for me and for a lot of women, so thank you.
Well, thank you. And it's not just me. There are others.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Mahalo. Thank you.